Welcome to the ADHD podcast. I am Shane Thrapp of Creating Order from Chaos.
And I'm Braden Young of Empower ADHD Solutions.
All right, everyone, we're going to be talking about therapy today, so get ready and buckle up. Honestly, most of us didn't grow up with dads who went to therapy. Like, our message was pretty simple: figure it out, push through it, or drink it out. That conditioning really doesn't disappear whenever you get diagnosed. One of the things that I have to do as a coach is have really clear boundaries between coaching and therapy because I'm not a therapist. But I do have to acknowledge that therapy changed how I show up as a dad, a husband, and a coach. And it's massively improved my life. Once I found a therapist that gets it, coaching like what Braden and I do builds systems and strategies. Therapy is what unpacks therapy is what unpacks why you need those. Because you can't organize your way out of trauma.
And, you know, when the idea of therapy first came up for me, I, like a lot of other men out there, was really skeptical about it because I had this idea in my head that it was just going to be like talk therapy. And I didn't want to be just sitting on a couch while some person listened to me tell my story and did doodles of me and wrote notes about how crazy I was. But when I actually started doing it, that was definitely far from the reality of it. And you mentioned finding the right therapist. I probably went through 3 or 4 therapists before I actually found one that was really familiar with ADHD. And at the time, I didn't know, but autism was a thing too. So that was something that was really important too. And getting into it, I realized that it's more than just talk therapy if they actually are specializing in the correct things, and they'll get you going down the right path. And we'll talk about some of the different forms of therapy that can really help out. But it definitely changed things for me.
Yeah, I think I went through 4 therapists before I found somebody who actually got it. And it was funny because she was a tiny, tiny person, but she would just always stand up to me. And in some cases, like literally stand up to me. And she just had this personality and this like presence that really helped ground me in who I really was. Because I always went into that therapy with, I just need to try harder, or I just want to be normal. And the thing that she really got me to understand was like, I've been trying to be normal my entire life. And a big part of that was like her helping me understand that there was no such thing as normal and that trying harder, like that's not the problem. The things that I have in my life, the tools that I have in my life were the problem. I was lacking so much of them. And a lot of guys out there really struggle around therapy and things like that. And they use like cost and like availability and things like that as a part of the excuse. But honestly, the real barrier around it, and this is something I struggled with for years, was shame.
Yeah, and you talk about the not having time. I know that was actually a pretty big thing for me was I'm a busy guy. I don't have time to be going to therapy all the time. But then you have to take into account like all the time that you spend fighting with your spouse or family or sitting in your car dreading going inside because you don't want to get in another argument. Things like that. All of those things take up time too. So when it comes down to it, really, you're only helping yourself along with all the people around you. And realizing that you're going to go through probably a few therapists before you get to a good one. One bad therapist doesn't mean therapy's not working. You wouldn't eat at one bad restaurant and then swear off food forever, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of this next section that I want to talk about is understanding that not all therapy is equal and not all therapy is going to be related to everything that you're dealing with. You may actually wind up needing one or more therapists to process through dealing with what you deal with. because a therapist who doesn't understand ADHD or autism honestly will probably treat you like you're just anxious and depressed. And that's kind of like why a lot of us leave like talk therapy and things of that nature as thinking it's pointless. The problem here was the fit, not therapy. And this is very true around talk-based therapy. Now, if you happen to be AuDHD, like Braden and I, and like many of you out there, the odds of getting misread is double because most therapists are trained to see one or the other and not both. You know, I personally found a lot of support in cognitive behavioral therapy and EMDR therapy, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. This is because I needed the support with what you learn through CBT, which is helps with my adaptations and making sure that I understand like the importance of cognitive flexibility because I deal with cognitive rigidity when it comes to autism. But I also struggle with emotional dysregulation from both ADHD and autism, so I had to work around understanding the skills that are needed from there. And the skills needed to be revolving around a really mindfulness-based approach. And okay, when y'all hear that, and I'm like, I know a number of y'all are like thinking about meditation. I'm not talking about sitting and breathing, but instead structured training to recognize like our system is escalating before we actually hit the wall. For my brain, traditional mindfulness can backfire because my interoceptive awareness, the ability to feel when I'm actually getting frustrated, goes too fast and I don't process it. And this needs to be paced. Now, a big part of that was going through EMDR therapy, which was helping me process a lot of the trauma that I had. And that's what EMDR therapy is built around. And a lot of you haven't heard of this, but a lot of you probably need this because a lot of neurodivergent men are walking around with unprocessed trauma that you don't even recognize as trauma. Years of being told you're lazy or you're stupid or you're not trying hard enough, like I said earlier, years of failed relationships, school experiences that wrecked your self-worth, jobs that just keep falling through. Like that stuff doesn't go away just because you have a diagnosis and a prescription. It lives in your nervous system. EMDR therapy works differently than talk therapy. Instead of just talking through the experience, it uses bilateral stimulation to help your brain reprocess traumatic memories so they stop running everything. For a lot of dads who know logically that you're not failures, EMDR can really help you push through and find the gaps that you were missing in even informed ADHD and autistic therapy. Like talk therapy can help you with understanding patterns, or cognitive behavioral therapy can help you understand patterns, but EMDR helps your nervous system let go of those patterns.
The type of therapy that I ended up doing and that really helped me kind of, it's not quite both, but it does have elements of dealing with trauma and everything, which was dialectical behavioral therapy and or DBT. And DBT is really it was originally adapted for borderline personality treatments because of the overlapping features like impulsivity and emotional dysregulation. And so it's really a skills-based therapy that teaches four different areas. It teaches mindfulness skills, emotional regulation skills, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness and communication. The distress tolerance piece is huge because for those of us like autistic dads dealing with sensory overload on top of the emotional flooding, it can be overwhelming, and it really helps teach some of the skills that can help get past that. And it also really helps with communicating as well and being able to get yourself in the right frame of mind for things. And so if you have a therapist that knows and understands ADHD and autism, they'll know to use these different types of therapies. But, if you do run into one that doesn't really understand the ADHD and autism, they can be putting you down the wrong path, which you'll usually know fairly quickly if you're if you're working well with it or not. So there's questions you can ask your therapist too to help out with that. What's your experience with ADHD and autism or AuDHD in adults? A lot will say they're neurodivergent friendly, but they don't have any kind of training with adult autism, which is actually more common than I'd like to think. So you
Yeah,
got to really push them on it.
yeah, one of the biggest questions I like to ask the therapists I work with is like, how many adults have with ADHD and or autism have you worked with? And I use that and or because I want to see what their response to that, because a lot of people don't really have a good background and understanding that of the overlap between ADHD and autism. And when they give me like that vague answer, honestly, that's a good sign for me to keep looking, because ADHD isn't just about focus. Autism isn't just about social awkwardness. Like they need to understand the full gamut of all the different spectrum issues, of all the different spectrum issues that we face with emotional regulation, time blindness, rejection sensitivity, sensory issues, executive function, and how these things interact with each other when they're both present. Because a good therapist is going to help you understand patterns and not just hand you cookie cutter coping skills. Like we need to understand why we shut down in conflict, or why we're masking, or what are we protecting ourselves from. And I know that it's frustrating to be trying to find a therapist in your local area who can really help you with these things. I'm a big firm believer of in-person therapy. I think it's super important. But telehealth has made therapy much more accessible. You don't always need somebody local. You need somebody who's good, and that's important.
I will say it's funny you say that because I actually went from one therapist who actually looked at me when I was talking about some of the struggles I have with hyperfocus. And they literally told me some people would love to have that ability to be able to focus the way you do. And so that shouldn't even be a struggle. And right then and there, I was like, nope. And immediately from that, I actually went to telehealth. I found a telehealth therapist that was like, yeah, that needs to be reported. They don't know anything.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Oh man.
yeah.
I, so I have to have this caveat for myself. I know, and you and me are a lot alike in this realm. We know a lot about ADHD and autism in both. I shouldn't have to be explaining to therapists how my brain works in a way that's clinical understanding. I'm here to get help and support from them. And because, like, when I'm dealing with issues in my relationship, that's a big part of it. Because when we go into these, and relationship therapy is super important, and we're going to actually talk about that too. I really want to talk about that one now. Because, like, when we're dealing with issues in our relationships and things of that nature, when when we are trying to fix things, relationship therapy is the way to go. It really is an important aspect of getting a good grasp of working things out with your partner. Because the thing is, if you've been undiagnosed ADHD or autistic or both, y'all have been clashing with each other, with both of you thinking that there's something wrong with the other. And the struggle comes into is if you do get diagnosed, all that trauma is still there. And this is why we need to be making sure that when we are getting that support and help that we need for relationship therapy, that we need to work with somebody who gets ADHD and autism and other types of mental health and how they interact with each other. Because when your partner is neurotypical, there's a fundamental disconnect in how you experience the world that honestly love alone can't bridge. Because there's things like the parent-child dynamic. We see this a lot where your partner is managing everything because when you are supposed to be taking care of things, it falls through. They become the scheduler, the reminder system, the manager. Neither one of you wanted this, but a lot of relationships in this realm turn into this. And without intervention, that's where a lot of these relationships go. This is especially true for ADHD dads. Because whenever we're trying to explain sensory and communication differences, hey, what you said is factually incorrect, right? How many of us have told our partners this? And as guys, we have learned this lesson the hard way. People don't like being corrected, especially our spouses. And yes, what they said was probably factually incorrect, but the way that we communicate that isn't always effective. And a good relationship therapist will help us process these things through and interpret things like our need for alone time or our differences in sexual needs. Sometimes when we're not able to express ourselves emotionally in the way that our partner needs, may come across as really flat, and because we're trying to be stoic, like that sounds like you don't care. And a therapist who understands only ADHD or autism or neither isn't going to be able to give that communication and interpretation that you need.
And I think it's especially important for those of us with autism because I feel like when you have autism, the concept of the cost to benefit ratio kind of goes out the window, especially when you talk about the whole factual thing when it comes to things, because we want things to be on point and factual, but someone who's neurotypical may be looking at it at more as, is this really worth it right now? And so being able to actually go to relationship therapist that is able to that understands autism and understands both our need for the facts to be accurate and as well as the importance of it is really going to be beneficial because they can act as a mediator.
So, how do we have this conversation with our spouse, right? Because a lot of times, like trying to have that conversation of, hey, I think that we need couples therapy sounds, hey, we're failing. I mean, a lot of our partners are going to hear that. A lot of our partners are going to take that, and especially if they're neurodivergent themselves, and think of it as a rejection or a failure on their part. The way that we have to reframe this is honestly just even to ourselves is I want to understand how my brain affects us and how your brain affects us so that we can stop fighting about some of these things and start developing better communication skills.
And I think it's important to note that your partner needs to understand your neurodivergence too. If they can't tell the difference between what's neurological and what's behavioral, they'll just keep taking things personally that we don't mean personally at all. And so having a therapist can help you understand each other, and that's the important thing to communicate. Therapy isn't defeat. It can be a translator for two people speaking different neurological languages to learn how to communicate and understand each other.
I think what I hope everybody walks away from this conversation is that therapy is not a sign that you're broken. It's a strategic thing that you can do for your brain and your relationships and your kids because your kids are watching how you handle struggle. And if you show them that getting help is what strong people do, they'll take that lesson with them into the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's not about not arguing or not fighting. It's about seeing that you're doing everything you can to make things work and to be able to understand each other because then that teaches resilience and being able to find solutions to make things work when you have two different communication styles is really important. Thank you, everybody. I hope you got something from this and make sure to like, subscribe, comment, click all the things, and we'll see you next time.